Today on Adversity to Strength, the podcast where we dive into real stories, real challenges and transformations that come from facing life head on. Today's guest is someone who truly embodies that mission, Briana Bass. Briana is a board certified clinical sexologist, therapist and former corporate executive who's become known for cutting through the noise in today's mental health and self-help landscape. She helps high-achieving, self-aware individuals break out of destructive cycles, heal their relationships, and stop chasing surface-level solutions. Featured in Paper City magazine, Briana speaks out openly about the realities behind success, shame, ambition, loneliness, emotional disconnection, and how these hidden struggles can hold back people. Her work is where emotional intelligence meets no BS transformation. She's not afraid to talk about the hard stuff, intimacy, self-sabotage, and how to finally take your power back. Briana, it's an absolute pleasure to get you on the podcast. Thank you for taking the time out.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. Take us back to the beginning of where your journey started, wherever that may be. Where do you think for where you are now, where do you reckon that beginning was for you?
I'd suppose then, I guess you could say college, I guess from a career standpoint, right? That track, did Bachelor of Science in psychology with a neuroscience focus, cognitive neuroscience focus, and pursued that also for a couple of years post-college. And then, pivoted and joined the business community and climbed my way up the corporate ladder, which, I, such a cliche line, but I'm still in recovery from today. And then I went back to my roots and decided to pursue the space that I'm in now. Got my master's in clinical mental health and then also became a therapist, a licensure, and then my PhD, pursued that in clinical sexology. I'm a board certified clinical sexologist now, which means that you've completed 40 doctorate level courses and tens of hours of supervision, case consultations, and a few exams and things like that. For people that don't understand what exactly board certified clinical sexologist means, I don't think anyone does. So I always try to give a little bit of some context.
Yeah, it sounds pretty impressive. There's a lot there as well. What made you become a therapist then? Because usually, with all the therapists I know and speaking for myself, they've been through some adversity. They've been through their own traumas. What was the reason for yourself to go in that path?
Yeah, the reason was, you're right, like all therapists, or at least majority of therapists that I've personally met, they have some sort of adversity in their background. And for that reason, they feel like they bring a certain kind of perspective, education, they bring certain insights and this real world firsthand experience to the table to be able to connect in a way that's critical with their clientele, or sort of think critically through issues because of what they faced in their own past. So I am no different. I have had incredible adversity in my past. And that absolutely contributed to some of the reasons why I felt I had an affinity to studying and learning and ensconcing myself in the world of human behavior.
And what age were you that you decided to become a therapist? Was there a particular reason that you thought, yeah, I want to become a therapist now? Was it through like some of your experiences, or was there any other reason you thought I want to become a therapist?
Being in corporate, a lot of therapy was kind of happening anyway. So maybe I'm working with teams or I'm working with individuals to understand why they're not doing what we need them to do, reaching goals, hitting metrics, things like that. Or perhaps there's discourse, or they're disgruntled or unhappy, or where do they want to go further in the company? Maybe things are going well. So a lot of it was therapy, in that I'm working with someone to kind of understand their drivers and their personal journey and where they're at with things. So in corporate, it was so much human behavior in the seat that I was in. So it was a very natural flow into, again, kind of going back to my roots, which was the world of psychology and human behavior and the brain and why we do what we do. So essentially, therapy, or being a therapist, for me made a ton of sense. There was so much overlap in what I was doing. And then also from a hard education standpoint, there was a lot of overlap. And then you've got, my master's in clinical mental health as well.
And what made you choose that particular area? Because it's not an unusual one, but a lot of people are doing like your general therapies, but you've gone into a specific area. What made you choose that?
The world of clinical sexology.
Yeah.
Specifically? Yeah, the world of clinical sexology, I felt like, one, there was a demand and very low supply. So I felt like there was a need, there was a gap. I live in Dallas, Texas. And so I am in what you would consider sort of the South, technically Midwest, but we, call ourselves fairly Southern. And so for those reasons, I also felt like it made sense to have somebody in Dallas, Texas, because I just didn't hear a lot of what I did. I didn't hear resources really around it, at least that were too in abundance. So one, I felt like there was a need. And then two, I noticed a lot of misconceptions around what clinical sexology was. And so I also felt compelled to go into this area because I could help with dispelling some of those misconceptions and coming from an education standpoint. And I choose to take a very intellectual approach, sort of academia heavy,
Yeah.
neuroscience heavy, brain kind of stuff. And I also felt like that fit into the world of clinical sexology. So it sort of played on what I naturally do and like.
What would you say the biggest misconceptions are?
The biggest misconceptions around clinical sexology would be that, you're walking into an office and we're going to talk about doing it. We're going to talk about what that looks like, what that act is like, and that actually rarely comes up. If you need to talk about that, we can certainly talk about that. But that
Sure.
rarely comes up. It's much more about your relationship with the idea of sex. And also, there's 8 forms of intimacy. So 7 that have nothing to do with being in the bedroom. Also, there's a misconception around clinical sexology being about specifically sex when certainly not. The other piece is that clinical sexology has a medical sort of biological anatomical nature to it, meaning we're talking about menopause, perimenopause, ED, performance anxiety, testosterone issues. We're talking about libido, we're talking about pelvic floor issues, all these other things that sort of go into think of like the sex organs and what we do. So that is a huge, huge, huge part of it. If anything, actually the true core of it. So another misconception would be again about it being sex itself when really it's really about kind of our mechanisms, our organs, and our relationship with sex from, whether it be when we're growing up or how it is today or in our partnership, our relationship, all of those things and sort of what the brain is telling you and how you interact with that subject. It's more focused on that.
So, sexologist, what's the difference between that and a sex therapist thing? So, a lot of people might not know the difference.
Yeah, it's what I was saying about sort of that medical, more biological,
Yeah.
anatomical kind of thing of it, right? Versus sex therapists might be a little bit more focused on the sex itself. There's tons of overlap. Don't get me wrong. You could easily go to a clinical sexologist and talk about those things. Absolutely. In those 40 PhD courses, there's all in there, right? But the clinical sexology piece is more on that sort of biological side of things.
Sort of clients that you get, is it like a really broad type of person, or is there kind of a specific type of people that you get that come through looking for help?
It's diverse. It is broad because this, what we're talking about, like I said, applies to everyone. However, I personally tend to have a certain kind of clientele. I'm not really targeting that. It's just naturally what I
Yeah.
resonate with. So I naturally have clientele that are typically in the corporate world or ambitious, driven, neurotic, want more from life. They're probably successful or they're trying to be. That is someone that I typically resonate best with because I do, again, tend to lean a little bit brain, little neuroscience, academia heavy. And someone like that really jives well. They're like, yeah, I want to understand why I do what I do. What are the mechanisms at play? A lot of times they want solutions. They want to talk about like their goals
Yeah.
and where they want to go from here. And yeah, they're like hungry. And that makes up a lot of my clientele. I'm not necessarily recruiting those individuals. It's just naturally we're drawn to
Yeah.
one another.
Yeah. I find that with a lot of my clients. A lot of my clients come to me and they're all very similar type of clients for the same sort of issues there. With what you do you find a lot of clients come to you and then kind of not sure why they're there? They know they need to be there, but they're not sure why. And you probably have to explain it to them because it sounds complex.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I get people that are like, hey, things on paper are pretty okay. Like I pay the bills, I have a decent job. I'm educated, like my health is maybe okay. There's nothing, I'm not presenting with some really overt issue that people are all sounding alarm bells around me, right? I'm not navigating with the world in this very unfunctional way. So yeah, they'll come to me and just be like, I'm unhappy. I feel unfulfilled. Something is off. I've lost my spark. I've lost my mojo, or a lot of relationship issues. My marriage is falling apart. Can't stand my spouse. This is happening XYZ. So, but they don't necessarily know why it's currently in the state and they're frustrated with themselves. They may have a lot of self-loathing be mean to themselves, in the mind, especially again with somebody that's a little bit driven, a little bit high performing. They're probably also going to be hypercritical of themselves and hold themselves to a certain kind of bar and standard and beat themselves up a lot. So yeah, I absolutely get people in that are like, look, here's what's kind of the situation, but I don't know if I could even tell you much more than that because I don't personally know what's at play here. I don't know how to fix it. And I feel like I should be a lot happier and more fulfilled than I am.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine probably a high percentage of the clients you get can't understand why they're unhappy because they've got everything and it's all good. So why am I so unhappy? What do you sort of say to them? Because I get sort of similar, but obviously less corporate people.
Well, there's a few things that I say to them. It depends on the context of how the conversation proceeds. But generally speaking, right, I talk about how, we've got a pie of life and it's comprised of a number of things that contribute into our fulfillment, right? So you've got maybe career, your identity with that, your own identity just separately from career, hobbies and interests. We have romantic partnerships, and then we have immediate family. So maybe if you have children or your parents or that kind of thing, and so on and so forth. So we've got sort of this pie, right? If everything has been emphasized in perhaps career, let's say, and we haven't been diversifying our efforts in these other areas, yeah, you're probably going to feel a little unfulfilled. If our romantic partnership is, let's say, in chaos or is a mess, yeah, that's going to throw some things out of whack. Or we have no community. So part of the pie is platonic community. If we have no community and we're feeling isolated and lonely, but these other things are okay, right? I want to draw attention to these other areas. But that's some of why you feel like on paper things are quite good, better maybe than the average person, but you still feel stuck and just not like yourself or treading water or burnt out or just unhappy. The other element would be, the brain part. So we do want to talk about kind of the neuroscience behind things and some of those drivers as well. And then another layer to all of this would be the hedonic treadmill. I talk a lot about the hedonic treadmill. In short description, the hedonic treadmill is essentially like, think of you have a carrot on a stick and you're
Yeah.
chasing this carrot on the stick and I don't know, you get the carrot and it like tastes okay. And then you look up and there's another carrot on a stick and you just keep
Yeah.
chasing that one, right? It's called a treadmill because, yeah, you feel like you're making all these moves in this particular direction and all
Yeah.
that, but really you're still staying put. The technical definition, though, is that we return to our previous or our baseline of happiness despite new milestones or goals being met. So if I'm seeking that promotion, when I get this promotion, I'm going to have more money. I'll feel
Right.
more valued at work. Things will be better, so on and so forth. Fair. What a logical, rational thing to think. And it will have an actual tangible input on your life, right? Like more
Yeah.
money, for example. You can take that trip. But you get there, and then 3, 4, 5 months later, you return back to kind of that baseline. So
Yeah.
then you start looking for the next promotion or whatever it is. And that's kind of what happened. So I do work with a lot of people identifying if they believe they've kind of fallen into this hedonic treadmill.
Yeah, for me, that's when people are searching for that external validation. I've had it so many times. If I get a new car, when I get the promotion, when I get more
Yeah.
money, when I get, and it comes from inside. Is that what you find that issue is because it's something that's going on inside? They're unfulfilled, or there's something not right inside.
Yeah, a lot of times it is about external validation. So that's another great point. I'd actually say that now as a fourth area would be where are you getting that validation from, externally or internally, right? So if I removed your career, if something happened within reason, of course you're going to be sad or you're going to be, of course, that would be a normal human reaction. So past all the reasonableness, who
Hmm.
would you be, without these items? Would you
Yeah.
like not even know like that? Oh my God, that would be devastating. I don't know. So where do we stand from a self-esteem and a confidence standpoint without some of these external items? So we do want to think about that. How much do we have tied into external validation, making sure always that we're either in good light with people or again the career thing, stuff like that. So we're desperate to sort of be seen by others and validated by them, get good feedback. You can also think of this as if you leave that party or you leave that meeting or whatever and you're ruminating and replaying the tapes of what did I say, what were they thinking, I saw their eyes dart, so on and so forth, right? You might want to check yourself for how much you tie into external validation.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I can imagine with the way you work, because you're very to the point and you say it how it is. that you can almost strip away that person's mask very quickly and leaving them feeling very vulnerable, because the one thing that they might have going for them is their job, and they can hide behind that. And if you go, well, actually, let's take this job, or where have you got it? They're like, you know, I don't know what I've got. Okay, well, I think we might have found a problem. Do you find that you get to your kind of answers very quickly with your clients?
Yeah, you're completely right, and I feel uncomfortable because I don't. I feel like I'm bragging on myself or something, and I don't mean to do that. But yeah, I do think I have a direct style, and yeah, I do try to get to the point. And if I'm working with somebody, I want them to get their time, money, energies worth. I want to be
Yeah.
productive. So don't get me wrong, we can have sessions where we're just kind of messing around and
Yeah.
there's some levity and like
Yeah.
sometimes we're not in the mood. We're not in the
Exactly.
mood. No big deal. But a lot of the time, right, I want to make sure like we're digging into things and just being productive. And that type of clientele can really appreciate that, right? And it is part of my strategy or my goal to get to a vulnerable place, quickly. I do think that that's where some of those answers lies. Yeah, I am a little bit direct, and some of that is so that we can kind of cut through, like I say, that noise and sort of just get to the meat and potatoes of things. We're not going to sit and I'm not just going to ask you how you feel for, an hour or two. I want to have like a meaningful and thoughtful dialogue about, where are we at with things? Invite me into your world. And I think from my personal choice of style and approach, and with the background that I have, does probably give more permission or more comfort to the client to invite me in, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm down to kind of move fast and get in the weeds
Yeah.
and things like that.
Yeah. It's the same with me. I do the same. I'm very blunt. I'm very to the point. I'll always be honest with them, and I'll tell them that right at the start there. Doesn't work for everyone. Go get a different therapist. That's absolutely fine. But for me, a lot of my clients go, I just want someone that's going to be honest with me, and I want to get straight to it as quick as I can because I don't know why I'm struggling or want to deal with what I'm struggling
Sure.
about. So I can imagine that you get a lot of clients that really appreciate you getting straight to it. Saves a lot of time.
Yeah, it's what I would want, right?
Yeah.
It's what I would want. So yeah, I think it is appreciated, and you're right. It's absolutely not for everybody. And that's why I mentioned that that's not what, every time is like. There's plenty that, whatever. We're just catching
Yeah.
up on
Same.
I don't know what's been happening in their personal life, or, how was the date that they were anxious about going on. Sometimes it goes that deep. But yeah, I think they do appreciate that, and it does feel a little bit more productive than maybe not being as direct. And again, I'm coming from a place of it's what I would value and what I would want as well from my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And with your clients that you get, what sort of length of time do they stay with you? I mean, as normal sort of therapy can vary. You have that one session, it could be for a month, it could be 6 months, some ongoing there. Is it the same for yourself?
I would say more long term,
Long
more
term?
long, yeah, more long term.
Yeah. Can
But it's
imagine that. Sure.
diverse. It's definitely diverse. There's people I've seen just for a few sessions. There's people that were having, maybe a relationship type of conflict, and we did some couples therapy, and they felt like they graduated from that. There's people that I've seen with suicidal ideations that were rather strong, and then after 3, 4, 5 months, they've sort of moved through that phase and feel really, really confident about not being there, and want to graduate. Graduate, by the way, isn't like a there's not like a real graduation. I just mean they want to move on. They don't want to come back. But yeah, my favorite clients though are the long-term ones. I want to be with you if I had it my way for years.
Yeah.
I love my people and I love hearing their journey, and stuff is inevitably going to come up. You don't have to be in crisis by any means to be still productive and get something out of therapy. Like not at all. Even just telling somebody about your week or about
Yeah.
work or a development or a love life situation, et cetera, or a struggle with your child or what have you, that sort of came up, that wasn't some big house on fire thing, is still so helpful. So if I had it my way, I like to be with people for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the same for me with a lot of my clients. And I've got clients that are they're not, some of them are not specifically there for therapy, but they actually want to come because this is their safe space. This is their time
Hmm.
that they can talk through or whatever. And it might be just a general conversation, and fine if that's what works for them. And even though you're doing the type of therapy you're doing, you still get the same type of person for the same sort of conversations.
Absolutely. Yeah, of course. I agree. And, we're saying the same thing as far as when I was talking about some of those levity sessions and some that are just about the week ahead or whatever's on their plate, things like that. Yeah. And it's not always doom and gloom. And further, right? Yeah, to have a carved out space to where you are able to take up all that space and it to
Yeah.
just be kind of selfishly about you and you to divulge and all of that. We don't really, for most of us, we don't really have that. That would be socially inappropriate, right? If I went to a happy hour with a girlfriend and I just only talked about myself, for a
Yeah.
very, very long time and about, maybe something going on in my work that they might find not that interesting or et cetera, right? So yeah, just having that carved out space that you can completely own and be as big as you want is so, so valuable.
Yeah.
That can move the needle big time, even if you're not talking about something all that serious. So, yeah, those just sort of general conversations and knowing that this person has some history with you, you've got rapport with them, you don't feel judged by them. Even that
Yeah.
transactional dynamic of the relationship, I think, even sort of makes it feel more safe.
Yeah, I think so. But you get clients, I've had it where they apologize for talking about themselves. And I'm
Hmm.
like, this is your time. This is about you. It's not about me, not about what I did at the weekend. It's to focus on you. And some people, even though it's a service they're powerful, they're so grateful that there is somebody listening to them. And it
Yeah,
makes all of the
absolutely.
difference there as well. And that in itself can build their confidence. You were saying about the pie. That's a new one for me. And pies are great when it comes to like the therapy world. Of how many people, what type of things are actually classed in that pie, would you say? Because obviously there's different things that affect people there. How would you describe the pie?
Yeah, think of the pie of your life.
Yeah.
And it's going to have these slices. There might be different sizes for everybody. They're not all equitable. You might put an emphasis in one area of your pie of life over another. All of that is fair, and we can figure all that out. But ultimately, this pie, right, we want to look at our career, our professional life. Even if you were, okay, I'm a stay-at-home mom. Okay, that's still counting as sort of a career. Or maybe you
Right.
feel so apart from your professional identity that that pie slice isn't colored in. So maybe you don't even actually see it that way, right? But so you're whatever you feel like sort of professionally you've got going on. And then you have community, right? Are you connected with other people platonically? So do you have girlfriends? Do you have guy friends? Are you part of a league of something, a book club, et cetera? Just what does your community look like? Maybe you're part of AA. I don't know. But then we have our immediate family. So the relationship we have with our parents, our siblings, our children, are we estranged from our family? Are our children a part of our daily lives, et cetera? So we want to kind of look at how things are going in that area. And then we have interests and hobbies. So what are your hobbies? What are your interests? Is it watching true crime documentaries? Cool. Is it a
Yeah.
sport or something like that, right? I get that as we get older, we're not necessarily going and participating in those types of things. So what is it then that, maybe it is just brunch on the weekend with a girlfriend, maybe it's self-care, it's you have, go to the spa, things like that. So even if you're doing it in isolation, that's completely fine. But what are your interests? What are your hobbies? Kind of what makes you feel good? And like you're investing in yourself. So those are some of the areas of the pie. And then again, a huge one is that romantic piece, right? Are we with a partner? Do we want to be with a partner, right? Because if we do, let's say we're single, well, then that's a piece that you and I really want to talk about because that's probably causing you a little bit of distress. Hey, I wish I was with someone, or it's a goal of mine to be with someone, to find a life partner, or maybe I want my dynamic to look completely different from that. Whatever it is for you, but that's a slice of your pie as well. What does your romantic life look like? And what do you want it to look like? And what is that disparity? So when we think of sort of these pie slices being colored in, yeah, which
Yeah.
ones are like gray and empty and which ones are really healthy and fully colored in and things like that. So it helps as a framework to sort of identify where all the chips fall in your life.
Can imagine that as you're talking to somebody explaining what their life's pie is, it can change. They don't realize just how much of a big impact that romantic relationship or lack of has. They thought it was a tiny thing. It's a major part. How do you deal with that when they got that realization that this is the main thing that's been affecting my life? They weren't expecting it.
A lot of people will identify, whoa, I guess I don't really have much going on in these, 4, 5, 6 areas. And it's really just kind of over here. Or maybe they're going like all of them I'm kind of displeased with. Maybe I feel very disconnected from my community. I'm lonely. I feel
Yeah.
isolated. So it's a jumping off point for some conversations on what we want to do about it. And maybe it's just put a pin in that. Just put a pin in that. We can worry about that later. But
Right.
ultimately, it's allowing us to kind of talk about some of these areas. And you can ask the client back, right? Like, what do they feel like is most important out of these areas? Or how do they feel the most negatively, adversely impacted by the lack of some of these areas. So it's a beautiful conversation starter. It's easy to understand. Things like that, I think, make it really effective as far as a framework on having some conversation. And then, of course, totally separate from the pie is just like your mental health, right? Like, again, back to the brain and kind of why we're doing what we're doing, or maybe how you were raised, that's all stuff important too. But I think that pie part is also a really great part of the conversation.
With like your style, because you just got so much knowledge, you can tell you've just got so much knowledge that I can ask you a question and you can give me an answer that could be the short version, the long version, the academic version. I can imagine
Thank you.
that I can imagine that a lot of clients are expecting you to give them the answers. So you've given them all of this understanding, you've explained to them perfectly, and then they're waiting for what do I do next? I'm kind of guessing you still look at them as they're the expert in their own life, and you ask them what they're going to do, and they often maybe they don't know.
Wow, that is such a great question because I cannot tell you how much that comes up. You're exactly right. It comes up all the time, and I have to give someone some terrible news, which is that I really can't give you the answer. One, because I can never compete, no matter how much I know, no matter how much
Yeah,
schooling I have had, no matter how many diplomas I have on the wall. I
yeah,
cannot compete with what you know because we are talking about a tiny amount of time that you're filling me in and it's secondhand. And maybe perhaps we're even talking about a relationship. So let's say there's a whole other
yeah,
person that's not even present. There's other sides to this coin and story and all of it contextually. I just can't compete with the information you personally have. So for those reasons, it would not be advantageous for me to give you direct advice. And then two, we have something that's high risk, right? If you took my direct advice, implemented it, and it did not go well, it could impact our relationship. You could resent me, things like that, right? And it could disrupt the therapeutic sort of partnership.
yeah.
So for those reasons also it's not really a good idea. But I will get asked all the time, what would you do in my shoes? And we'll laugh about it, I'll be like, oh,
Yeah,
and I'll sometimes admit, well, I know what I would do.
yeah,
Yeah, the goal ultimately is that we have enough of a productive conversation where you either have more clarity on what to do, or even you recognize I don't have clarity on what to do. And so maybe I shouldn't be making this kind of decision in haste, for example. But either way, both are productive and, helping you with kind of what to figure out. Clients, I think, through doing work together, just like I'm sure you find in yours, become session over session. It takes a while, but very empowered. So
yeah.
whatever they start, the starting place that they're at, as far as their own agency, confidence, and esteem to make decisions, should, or I would most of the time, radically changes.
Yeah.
6, 7, 8, 10 sessions into where they are able to access these answers and things like that far stronger than they did when we started. So yeah, they develop an incredible skill of accessing who they are, and from the work together, I think that they
I
just
think
become
so.
so empowered.
Yeah, I think with yourself, I think just having, even in the first session, they're going to feel a lot of confidence because you've got so much knowledge and understanding, and you'll just by you explaining them to them about the process, how this works, which is similar to what I do. Definitely not as in depth as yourself, nowhere nearer. But they're going to feel full of confidence because there's so much you've give them to work with to make their own decisions. So I can imagine them coming out of their first session feeling really empowered, ready to get to the next session and get to work because there's so much that they can use that they didn't know. You've explained it to them, I think.
Sometimes we'll say, sometimes I tell clients that they might have a little bit of a emotional hangover. They might actually feel worse those first few sessions
Yeah.
than better, because we're not necessarily talking about everything that's going great and all the good stuff. It's usually quite focused on what is not so great. Why do we feel bad? What do we feel like is, quote, broken in their eyes right now, right? So sometimes you can also get someone who is saying, I am aware that this thing that happened in my life, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, still resides today. It impacts how I interact with the
Yeah.
world around me. But this is not something that they're talking about in their everyday life, and maybe even haven't for 10 years.
Yeah.
And now we're going to talk about it. So, and we're not necessarily going to have a solution for it. It might not have a solution. The answer is to talk about it. So, for
Yeah.
those reasons, it's not necessarily walking out feeling like, all on cloud nine and a pink cloud and what have you for those first few sessions, it's really possible that it actually might feel a little bit worse. Or perhaps if you're in a relationship, I see this a lot, and you're coming in and now sharing with somebody really in depth about some of the challenges you're facing. You might go home and go, wow, it's worse than I thought it was. Because now that I
Yeah,
hear myself say
definitely.
all
Yeah.
of these things out loud, yeah, and I see that I'm getting validation from someone that they're going, yeah, that would be very difficult. I can understand how that's an incredible challenge for you right now. So you might actually go, no, because you're facing some of the music.
Yeah, I'll get that because I've got clients, various types of clients I've had over the years where they don't realize what's happened to them, what type of relationship they're in, what things that they've gone through
Yeah.
in their past, and then the realization and the shock there as well. And so, yeah, I get that there's a lot for them to take away and reflect on there as well. How do you get the clients to deal with the fact that you're saying to them there's not a solution? Because that I always find that a bit of a difficult one because they want the problems to be solved. And sometimes it's about, well, we're going to have to deal with this as best that we can and live with it. I still find that a little bit tricky, even though I've got experience there. How do you deal with something like that when you have to tell them there's no solution to this?
You're completely right. That is a tough moment. And that is a little bit difficult to explain. I tend to just say it outright. Sounds like you do too, which is that this isn't a solution, right? If we want to speak in a real world example, perhaps you were assaulted when you were 15, or you had some
Yeah.
sort of bad experience in that regard, right? And now we're talking about that, 15, 20 years later, let's say, right?
Yeah.
We are not going to come up with a solution. That situation happened and it will not be changing. That occurred. Or another scenario would be grief, right? Somebody passed. We're not
Yeah.
getting them back, nothing like that. We cannot resolve this versus you're facing a career issue or your relationship, you're having a lot of conflict. We can literally solve it. We can literally fix it. Like you guys can come in or what have you, and we can find actual answers and go through tangible things, right? And there will be a before and an after. But for grief, let's say, or that assault example, right? What I have to do is sort of share with them that we won't be solving this particular issue. But what I can kind of bank on is that from us discussing it and processing it and understanding it, it should move the needle and
Yeah.
how it hangs on you today. The weight of that monkey on your back should be a lot lighter. Maybe not at first, like I was saying earlier, but it should, in theory, get a lot lighter from our work together. So we're not really solving it. There's not necessarily an answer to find, but you should feel better just in the fact that we are now facing some of these things, digging into the details about them and being honest and vulnerable with one another. And you're sharing with me what this experience was really like. And we can kind of figure out how expensive was it? What has it cost you? And how is it still costing you today? And I wonder if there's
Yeah.
some things that we can do where it's not so expensive. And then moving forward, right, you would have, quote, a better life because this isn't owning you as much.
That's really interesting that you say the cost. That's something that I'd use, to be honest. Can you explain a bit more about cost? Because a lot of people say cost finance, but if it's to having a hold over their life, it's affecting their daily lives, how much is a cost there? So when they say to you, what do you mean cost? What do you say to them?
Sure. I talk with them about, let's say, for example, the relationships, right? That's one that you can really kind of see cost. So perhaps you're sabotaging relationships. Things start to go well and you hit the eject button, or you're starting conflict that doesn't necessarily need to be there, or you're waiting on the shoe to drop. And so maybe you're investigating them and assessing this potential partner in a way that's especially scrutinizing. I could go on for an hour about all sorts of ways that cost is showing up in how you interact with a potential romantic partnership or through dating, things like that. So when we talk about cost, that's also a good way to sort of define it, right? If this was not part of you or had such a chokehold, you may not be participating or choosing some of those behaviors. And from that, your romantic partnerships could thrive, or you might be a lot happier with yourself. You won't have as much shame, as much guilt, things like this. So when we talk about cost, it's how is this particular thing causing me to act in a way that is against my best interest?
Yeah. That's a great way of putting it, breaking it down there. And again, I would imagine that they've not realized that they've been self-sabotaging something.
Yeah,
It's a,
a lot of them aren't even aware, and some are, right? Or maybe they just know the results. They just
yeah.
know that things aren't working out, or I kind of keep seeing this pattern happening.
And when they realize that every time I do that in a relationship, it costs this, it does that, do you then have to switch focus on dealing with that part of the issue with the client, that they need to deal with that in order to help maintain relationships? Do you then switch to that area?
Yeah, it's certainly possible that that particular area would become a part of our conversation and part of our work ahead, right? So yeah, I hit the eject button, or it doesn't take a lot for me to be like, I'm out, right? If we're talking about that. So perhaps we want to understand why, what's happening for you before those moments. Can we define that? And then within the definition of that, right? Okay, so I'm hearing that they didn't text you back fast enough. And so you got in your head that they didn't like you that much, or you couldn't trust them, or maybe they weren't reliable. Or perhaps you liked them more than they liked you, or it stirred up some insecurity. Why aren't they texting me back fast enough? So now I'm a little bit anxious. So instead of letting this thing fall apart on its own, which is what my brain is telling me is going to happen, I'm going to go ahead and get in the driver's seat, take the reins, and be in control. And I'm going to exit now because I'm choosing that timeline. It's on my timeline, and this is as safe as possible. It's my choice on my time, and I know it's coming, and I'm doing it. And the brain will convince you into, hey, that's what we're going to do. See you later. And we eject, which is a form in the example I just gave of sabotage, right? So yeah, that's what I mean by quite literally it becoming a part of the conversation. That's kind of identifying why we may be doing that. And then you could take it so many ways further back, right? Which is, why are we afraid of, getting in that position where we would be vulnerable and may get left, or may like someone more than they like me, or, what would that mean?
Yeah, no, it's such a good strategy to use there as well, and definitely like a tried and trusted one there. I think with the style that you've got, I can see that where you would, with a lot of clients that would come to other therapists, they would be there almost for such a long time. But with your, I'm guessing this is how you are in therapy session. You're like fast moving, and for me, that for a lot of clients, they're going to have to work harder than what they thought they would have done. Instead of sitting there going, oh, I'm really not sure. They're like, actually, I've got to keep up here, there as well. So they kind of get to where their pain is a lot quicker. Do you find that, as opposed to some therapists where it's take your time and let's be slow with everything?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you are getting to things a little bit quicker with this particular style and choice of approach. And from that, there's productivity and things, but also from that, right, there's a lot of discomfort, and that's
Yeah.
not missed on me. Yeah.
Yeah. Out of their comfort zone, but that's not a bad thing, because a lot of times they
Right.
come to you
Yeah.
in their comfort zone and look where they are. So I think that's a really
Yeah.
good, a good thing there as well. With yourself, what's for now and for the future? Because you just look like you're so busy with everything, and you're just getting bigger and bigger with everything that you're doing.
What's in my future? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. Yeah. What's in your future? What's next for yourself?
Yeah, I do a lot of podcasts. I do a lot of
Yeah.
interviews. I appreciate being positioned as either an expert, one of many, many, many in the industry, and bringing my personal perspective. So that's what I love to do. So I want to continue investing in that. As far as my practice is concerned, believe it or not, I'm really comfortable and kind of happy with its size. The
Yeah.
idea of managing staff and multiple locations and all of that, I am actually not eager at all to do that. So that actually is not my intention. I love working with my clients, and I absolutely love my clients, and I really am genuinely rooting for them, which
Yeah.
is another thing to our conversation kind of at the beginning, right? That's unique about that dynamic, is somebody's kind of in your court. If you were to talk to a friend or something, or maybe somebody in the workplace, I know this is such a dark thing to say, but you don't necessarily know that they have your best interest in mind. Maybe they feel
Yeah.
competitive with you, things like that, right? So maybe your success in their mind impedes theirs, or something like that, right? So anyways, I want to continue kind of just focusing on my clients and furthering my education just through experience and stuff like that. And I have an insatiable appetite for consuming information, and I want to keep
Yeah.
doing that. But really, it's stuff like this that I'm absolutely loving and want to continue to do more and more of.
Yeah. It sounds great what you're doing. It is so interesting. I love your perspective. I love your strategies. I love the way that you go about your therapy. I think it's brilliant. You can see why you get such great results. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on today.
You're so welcome. I loved it, and you're excellent with your questions. They were great. I really appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much.